This one comes up a lot, and I've been thinking about it lately as I'm embarking on a new story and trying to figure out how to do it, where to get ideas from, and filling my brain with inspirations. It's really easy to go down the road of ripping and copying, so let's take a look at how you steal like an artist, what that really means. I saw a book titled Steal Like an Artist, and it got me thinking, like, what does that mean? No one liked it when AI did it, and it can be frustrating seeing indie mangaka do it. Well, turns out the book title's a little clickbaity. The author, Austin Kleon, didn't mean literally plagiarize, skim, or rip off, but study, remix, mash up, and transform. Being inspired by other creatives and trying out what they do. Build on what came before you. Don't just copy it and assume no one will notice. It cheapens your work and can be really disappointing for readers when they look for fresh new things from indie artists and just see thinly veiled ripoffs of what they've read coming out of Japan. I've seen my share of panels where I know not only what manga you got it from, but what scene and maybe what volume. Talk about an immersion breaker. And if you just copy, you don't get the experience of developing what you're copying. You just get an end product with no context. Does this mean everything you do has to be 100% out of your own mind? No, of course not. But you should be an oven for ideas and a filter, not a photocopier. So let's break it up into reference, copying, and tracing. So reference, first kind of reference. When you're drawing and try to visually recreate something, especially something that's real, it's really actually important to reference. For some reason, a lot of artists get mad about this when they're talking to beginner artists and new artists. Oh, you can't reference. You have to, that's copying and stealing. No, it's really not. It's really not. In the past, artists may have had the luxury of going out into a field and painting a sunset right there, right where they are, or a particular building, or sitting for a portrait or something. But we all don't have that luxury. When I was working on Scatheless, Chapter 2, I took Google Maps to street level and walked around Dublin. I can't go there physically, but I could go and look and see what the city actually looks like, take some screenshots instead of photos, and then draw from there. So especially backgrounds, but also people and poses, you really, really want reference. You want to reference life, either the life around you in a mirror or a camera, or photos of real things from the internet. Try not to fall into the trap of using just manga as your only reference source. It will distort your work and put a ceiling on your skills. It's one thing to look in manga and say, how did this artist handle this thing? How do they draw an eye, or what's their specific line work like their technique? Okay, it's one thing to look at manga and say, okay, I want to learn and copy and eat this technique. But if you're saying, okay, I want to draw a person, so I'm gonna pick a manga and just draw a person, well, you're drawing a distortion and an interpretation and a stylized version of a person. And it'll really hold you back eventually. Your drawings are a visual language for telling your story. If you use good references, your imagery will be founded in reality and actually more immersive. The proportions and forms will be real, even if you stylize them. If you use a real reference, then surprisingly, through the act of you drawing it, it becomes interpreted in your hand in your style. If you copy another artist, you're interpreting their interpretation and it creates a distortion. Like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, they get really weird after a while. Many of the issues I've noticed early and beginner manga artists have with faces and people really comes down to drawing from characters and learning how to draw manga faces and like Dragon Ball Z faces versus like a real face. And then going back and looking at, say, Dragon Ball Z and saying, okay, how did he interpret a real face? And how did he simplify it? Because really that's what we're doing, right? We're taking real things and simplifying them into line art. Face and body proportions, clothing, poses, hair, hands, feet, everybody's favorite, all end up distorted because you're training yourself on other people's art, on their interpretation. If you're just starting out, sure, do that to learn style, but also find a photo of a person, draw it, and maybe give them the features of the character you're wanting to draw. If you're drawing digitally, sketch the real person and then do another layer and draw the character stuff over the top. It can be a fun way to learn both at the same time. Because when it comes down to it, manga is just simplified real things, simplified real people. Do yourself a favor and look at images of real people. A fun example I love is not necessarily in drawing, but in an entire scene. In the balcony scene for A Silent Voice, the staff actually went onto their balcony or rooftop and acted it out. They literally had one of the guys dangling over the edge. They wanted to really portray the real positions, movement, facial expressions, the emotion accurately. And it's one of the most powerful scenes you'll find. I tried to hunt down the article or video that mentions this. I saw it years ago, and it was drowned out by videos and threads about how moving this scene was, how deeply it affected people. The efforts of the staff and the man dangling from the balcony or the roof weren't wasted. Okay, so there's another form of reference, and this is more in your writing. And of course it's visual, but it's the storytelling versus the act of drawing itself. And this one can get kind of interesting and can go very wrong very easily. And it's similar to an Easter egg, where you take an idea and base some piece of it on something else as like a nod and a wink to the original creator and to the audience. Like, I know what this is, you know what this is, we both love it, let's have a moment. This is when you copy on purpose for a reason. It's much different than copying something current and changing it slightly, hoping that no one notices and it looks, it looks original and no one will notice, like you did it because you're that cool. To the first version, the Easter egg, there are Horikoshi covers and illustrations that reference kid comics, which is his inspiration. And it can be fun to look at it and look at the old American comics and say, wow, which cover is this? That's fun. He's not trying to necessarily pass it off as he came up with it. It's obviously a reference. And that's fun. But I doubt he takes entire panels and just slaps his characters in them to make it look better. No nod and wink, just a hope that no one notices and people assume that you're better than you apparently are. So this takes us to copying. I'm gonna sandwich this in between tracing and referencing, as it's kind of the shadow side of both. As I said at the top, don't copy and steal like AI. Use it as a tool to enhance your work. Copying can be a great way to learn. Just be honest about it. If you find yourself doing this, take some time to study the panel compositions that you're fond of, draw them, trace them, think about them. Do they elicit a particular feeling or emotion? What draws you into it and makes you like it so much? Try to work out what the artist was doing and why, what they were trying to say and what they wanted you to feel. I remember reading a manga someone sent me for inclusion in Mayapple, my manga magazine that lasted a year, and one panel stood out like a sore thumb. It was a different style from everything else, and it was very definitely Orihime from Bleach. And it's not the only example of that I've seen, but it was one I could easily recall and Google. And it really takes you out of the moment. I think at the time I warned them about using it and suggested they change that specific panel. Instead of just copying the Orihime panel, spend some time with it, think about why you like it, or look up live action images of people crying. If you want to figure out how crying is visually handled in manga, that's different. Look up different characters crying, learn the visual language of manga tears, and then draw them in your own hand in your own panel. This is even more important if you're into doing competitions for manga. A, the judges will recognize it. And B, they want to know that you can do the work yourself and not be hobbled by needing to rip off other manga and look stuff up all the time. Think of the manga competitions as a test or job interview with a high failure rate. Because if you're out there being the famous mangaka that you want to be, you have no time to find a particular pose or panel or start Googling panels. You have to be able to just do it. But if you take the time to learn how to do it with the help of looking at your heroes, you'll get there. It'll take time, but you'll get there. Tracing. If you want to get most artists upset, breathe the word tracing. Like anything else, tracing is a tool. Use it with care and it can help you learn or save a lot of time. Overuse it and you'll actually undermine your own skills. I know great artists who do fine detail and come to find out, disappointingly, they edit together pictures off the internet, print them out and trace them. It works for them, but I find that too restricting and would rather grow my own skills. Because if you're having to Google all the components for your piece, you're limited by what comes up from the algorithm and what Google wants to show you. Versus being able to use your own imagination to pull stuff together. And then you get into referencing, right? So you have your ideas, you pull them together. You don't necessarily know what they look like offhand, so you pull together a bunch of references. And I can understand maybe tracing some fine detail, like if you have very detailed embroidery or something, that is definitely something worth tracing. But let's get there. Many artists will use it to save time. They know how to draw the thing being traced, so it's not a crutch as much as it can save an entire day's work. I remember seeing an interview years ago with Donato Giancola, and he talked about using tracing for certain things in his paintings as a time saver. Now, he doesn't just stop at the traced drawing and say, there you go, there's my hand. He goes on to paint a crazy oil piece and the things he does to paint metal is crazy. That's a whole other aside that's nothing to do with this video, but it blew my mind. But anyway, another good option and use for tracing is to learn. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately because I'm coming up against starting a new story and I would like to up my game in certain parts of my art, learn some new things. And one of the things I noticed in a manga I was reading recently, I really love the different ways they did eyes. Every character had a different kind of eye, and I have a lot of trouble with eyes. So I pulled them out on my iPad, love digital for this, and first started referencing and then decided to actually trace over the eyes a few times to get the feeling for the muscle memory, and then went on to just use them as reference and then try to practice it. So it can be a way to train your hand and eye to do a particular thing. And it doesn't hurt to do that, you know? You're not going to post hopefully, a picture of 5,000 traced eyes onto your social media. That's something private for you to up your skills and polish your work behind the scenes, which before social media, we had all the time in the world to do. It's very weird being in a world where the underpinnings of an artist is exposed. But anyway, getting distracted as always. So don't hobble yourself by only tracing. Move on to reference. You want to expand your hand-eye vocabulary. If you're learning another language by only using the songs from one artist and just learning those songs, your conversation skills will be very limited. Referencing, copying, and tracing are 3 tools in your manga toolbox that can teach you a lot or turn dark and rob you of your creativity and skill. Use them for study and learning, time-saving. Fun one can be tracing a background at a rough draft phase and then re-inking it freehand so it looks more natural and it's more in your feel of your hand. If you don't have the luxury of time, like most Japanese pros, tracing may be a good option, though at that point you'd probably be more likely to use stock images from Clip Studio or washed out photos like Inio Asano. Many manga techniques I'm finding come from a need for speed. The weekly deadlines are no joke, and so many corners end up being cut for time. So really searching around for panels to rip off or character poses to trace to impress your friends eats way too much time. And it's not a realistic thing that they do. We have the luxury of more time to work freehand as well as referencing. We're not pushed to only use those stock photos. To make manga at a professional level, even a pro indie, you need to be able to turn it out. So being comfortable composing and drawing as much as yourself with your own knowledge, or snapping a few pose photos of yourself or spouse to find the right angle without searching the internet for 3 days. Even using 3D, though I would, for people anyway, combine 3D with referencing real people because there's like a dead lifelessness. I can see when an artist is using 3D because there's like a deadness to the vibe of the character. They're not alive. So think about how you're expanding your manga making skills without holding yourself back. Do that R&D, do that practice. I believe in you.